I was standing in the back room of my father's store when everything collapsed. The air felt heavy, like something bad was coming, but I never imagined it would come from my own blood. My father held his phone in his hand, his face tight with anger and disappointment. My mother wouldn't even look at me. Everyone was already convinced I had done something unforgivable. Money was missing from the cash drawer. Not a small amount. Enough to cause panic. Enough to make someone look guilty without a trial. My sister stood near the counter, arms crossed, eyes red like she had been crying for a long time. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She just said my name and quietly told them what she believed had happened. That was all it took. No one asked me where I had been. No one asked why I would risk everything for cash that wasn't even mine. I tried to speak, but every word sounded weak in that moment. It felt like the truth didn't matter anymore. The decision had already been made in their minds. My father told me to hand over my store keys. His voice shook, but not with doubt. With anger. I remember that more than anything. The way trust disappeared in seconds, after years of working beside him every day. I had helped grow that business. I had opened the store early and closed it late. None of that mattered anymore. What hurt the most was my sister's silence. She didn't defend me. She didn't hesitate. She just stood there while my life was being taken apart piece by piece. I kept waiting for her to say something. Anything. But she didn't. That night, I packed a small bag and left the house I grew up in. My phone stayed quiet. No messages. No questions. No chance to explain. It was like I had already been erased. As I walked down the street, I felt more than anger. I felt disbelief. I kept replaying the moment in my head, trying to understand how everything had turned so fast. I wasn't just accused of stealing money. I was accused of betraying my family. And once that idea took hold, nothing I said could change it. I didn't know then that the truth was waiting. I didn't know that a quiet witness had recorded everything. All I knew was that I had lost my place in my family, my work, and my sense of safety in one single day. And the person who put me there was someone I trusted with my life. The next few days felt colder than the night I left. When I came back to speak with my parents, I hoped things would slow down. I thought they might listen this time. Instead, I walked into a house where my name already carried shame. The decision had been made without me, and it was clear I was no longer welcome as a son, only as a problem. My parents kept repeating the same sentence. Rachel had always been careful. She had always followed the rules. She had always told the truth. They spoke about her like she was proof itself. I realized then that I wasn't being judged by facts, but by a picture they had already painted in their minds. I tried to explain where I was that day and how little sense the accusation made. My words were calm, but my chest burned as I spoke. Every sentence was cut short. Every explanation was met with a shake of the head. My mother asked why I couldn't just admit it and move on. That question hurt more than any accusation. It told me they wanted peace, not truth. My father warned me that continuing to deny it would only make things worse. He said families don't survive lies. I almost laughed at that, but I swallowed it. The irony was too painful. I wasn't the one lying, yet I was being treated like the danger. Rachel stayed quiet through most of it. When she did speak, she sounded tired and hurt. She said she wished it wasn't me. That sentence changed something inside me. It told me she wasn't confused. She had already accepted the story she created, and now she was asking everyone else to accept it too. The house I grew up in stopped feeling like home. My old room felt smaller. Conversations ended when I entered the room. Family dinners happened without me. I became someone they talked about, not someone they spoke to. Friends who were close to the family stopped calling. People I trusted avoided eye contact. No one wanted to be close to the person who broke his parents' trust. I started to understand how easily a label can replace a person. At night, the silence was the worst part. There was no one to tell my side to. No one who wanted to hear it. I felt cut off, not just from my family, but from my identity. I had always been the dependable one, the helper, the son who stayed close. Now I was the problem they wanted gone. That's when the loneliness truly set in. Not because I was alone, but because I was surrounded by people who chose a story over their own blood.
Losing the job came next, and it happened without much warning. I was told my services were no longer needed and that it was better for everyone if I stayed away. No meeting. No explanation. Just a short conversation that made it clear I didn't belong there anymore. The place where I had spent so many years suddenly felt like it had never been mine. I tried reaching out to relatives, thinking at least one of them would listen. Calls went unanswered. Messages were left on read or ignored completely. Family gatherings continued without me. I saw it in small ways, like being removed from group plans or hearing about events after they were already over. It felt like I had been quietly pushed out of a life I once shared. The hardest part was watching people believe something about me that wasn't true. I could feel it in their distance. They spoke carefully around me, as if I might break or lash out. I started to doubt myself, not because I was guilty, but because everyone else seemed so sure. Laura tried to stay neutral at first. She said she wanted to believe me, but her voice changed. The questions came slowly, then more directly. She asked why my family would lie. She asked why Rachel would make something like that up. Each question felt like a small cut. I realized she was looking for a reason to make sense of the story, and the easiest one was that it was true. I told her again and again that I hadn't done it. I explained how much I had to lose. She listened, but something between us shifted. Trust became careful. Silence grew longer. I could see doubt in her eyes, even when she tried to hide it. Shame settled in, even though I knew I didn't deserve it. I started avoiding familiar places. I stopped explaining myself because it felt useless. Anger came next, sharp and sudden, but it had nowhere to go. I couldn't fight my family. I couldn't force people to believe me. Confusion followed close behind. I kept asking myself how one lie could move so fast and reach so far. Years of showing up, helping out, and being dependable disappeared in days. It scared me to realize how fragile trust really is. By the end of that week, I felt smaller than I ever had. Not because I had done something wrong, but because I had learned how quickly the world can turn its back when a story sounds easier than the truth. After everything settled into an uneasy silence, I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. At first, they were small and easy to ignore, but once I saw them, I couldn't unsee them. The story I had heard didn't stay the same. It shifted depending on who was listening. Rachel explained the timing differently each time it came up. Sometimes she said the money went missing in the afternoon, other times closer to closing. The details changed just enough to feel off. No one else seemed to notice, or maybe they didn't want to. I noticed because my life depended on it. When I crossed paths with her, she avoided my eyes. It wasn't the look of someone hurt by betrayal. It was the look of someone uncomfortable being seen. When I spoke, she stayed quiet, but her hand shook slightly. That stayed with me. I replayed the day in my head again and again, trying to match her words with what I remembered. The pieces didn't fit. I knew where I had been. I knew what I had done. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that the story being told couldn't fully exist the way it was described. That's when I remembered the cameras. They had been installed not long before everything happened, after my father updated the insurance policy. At the time, it felt like a small change, barely worth noticing. Now it felt important. The thought sat quietly in the back of my mind. I mentioned it once, carefully, during a short conversation at the store. I said the cameras might clear things up. The reaction was immediate and cold. I was told not to bring it up again. My father said it would only reopen wounds. Rachel looked tense but said nothing. That told me more than words ever could. From that moment on, I stopped trying to convince anyone. I understood that pushing too hard would only make me look desperate. Instead, I listened. I watched. I paid attention to what people said when they thought I wasn't listening. I noticed how quickly conversations ended when the subject came close to that day. I noticed how Rachel left the room when certain questions were asked. I noticed how defensive everyone became about keeping things settled. Hope didn't come back all at once. It came slowly, quietly. Not as relief, but as clarity. I didn't know how or when the truth would come out, but I knew something had been left behind. Something that didn't lie. So I waited. Not because I was weak, but because I finally understood that the truth doesn't need to be shouted. Sometimes it just needs time to be seen. The truth didn't come to me all at once. It came in pieces, through quiet moments and things people didn't realize they were revealing. I wasn't looking to dig into her life, but once suspicion takes root, your mind starts connecting dots on its own. I learned that Rachel had been struggling with money for a while. It wasn't something she talked about openly. On the surface, she looked stable and in control, but beneath that, things were falling apart. Bills were stacking up. She had made commitments she couldn't keep. There were payments she was behind on and pressure she didn't know how to handle. I heard it from an aunt who mentioned how stressed Rachel had been lately. Then from a cousin who said she had borrowed money more than once and never explained why. Each detail added weight to a picture that was becoming impossible to ignore. It finally made sense why the missing cash was such a big deal to her. She didn't just want extra money. She needed it. And she needed it quickly. Panic does strange things to people, but what she did wasn't panic alone. It was planning. She knew the family trusted her. She knew they saw her as careful and honest. And she knew I was close enough to the business that blaming me would sound reasonable. That realization hit harder than the accusation ever did. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a bad decision made in fear. It was a choice. I thought about how calmly she had spoken that day. How prepared she sounded. How quickly the story came out. Those weren't the reactions of someone caught off guard. They were the actions of someone who had already decided how things would play out. That's when the betrayal truly sank in. Not because she took the money, but because she used me to save herself. She watched my life unravel and let it happen. She let our parents turn their backs on me. She let everyone believe I was capable of something I would never do. I felt a deep anger, but it was quiet. Heavy. It settled in my chest and stayed there. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about trust being traded away like it meant nothing. What hurt the most was knowing she had options. She could have asked for help. She could have told the truth. She chose the path that protected her image and destroyed mine. I stopped seeing her as just my sister after that. I saw her as someone who made a calculation and decided I was the cost she was willing to pay. That kind of betrayal changes how you see people forever. From that point on, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, I would never beg for understanding again. The truth existed, whether anyone wanted it or not. And when it finally surfaced, it would speak louder than anything I could say. After everything I had learned, I made a choice that surprised even me. I stopped talking about what happened. I didn't defend myself anymore. I didn't argue. I didn't try to clear my name. I let the silence settle, even though it was uncomfortable and heavy. I took a temporary job far from the family business. It wasn't impressive, and it didn't pay much, but it was honest. No one there knew my past. No one looked at me with suspicion. For the first time in weeks, I felt like a person again, not a rumor. I kept my routine simple. Work, home, sleep. I avoided places where I might run into familiar faces. I didn't want pity or questions. I wanted space to breathe and think without feeling judged. At night, the anger would try to rise, but I didn't let it control me. I reminded myself that reacting would only give the lie more power. I had seen how fast words could be twisted. Silence, for once, felt safer. Slowly, I started rebuilding myself. Not my reputation, but my balance. I focused on staying calm. I focused on keeping my dignity intact. I didn't need anyone's approval to know who I was. The family saw my silence as acceptance. I could tell from the way they spoke to me when our paths crossed. Short conversations. Polite distance. It hurt, but it also confirmed something important. They weren't interested in the truth yet. They were interested in comfort. I let them have that comfort. I let them believe everything was settled. I watched as the tension slowly faded from their faces, even though it was built on something false. Waiting wasn't easy. There were days I wanted to shout and force the truth into the open. But I understood something then that I hadn't before. Time has a way of bringing things to the surface without effort. This wasn't weakness. It was control. I wasn't hiding. I was preparing. Every day I stayed calm was a day I took my power back. I didn't know when things would change. I didn't know how the truth would come out. But I trusted that it would. Lies need protection. Truth doesn't. That was the beginning of my quiet revenge. Not through anger or exposure, but through patience. I chose to survive the lie instead of fighting it. And in that choice, I began to feel stronger than I had since everything started. Months passed before anything changed. Life had settled into a strange routine, and the past was treated like something better left untouched. Then a new problem surfaced at the store. Inventory numbers didn't match again. Nothing dramatic, but enough to cause concern. A meeting was called to go over records and procedures. I was asked to be there because I still knew the systems well. I agreed without hesitation. I didn't ask questions. I didn't bring up the past. I simply showed up. As the discussion moved forward, someone mentioned reviewing old footage to understand patterns and prevent future losses. The words hung in the air longer than they should have. I stayed quiet. I didn't look at anyone. I just listened. That's when I noticed the shift. Rachel's posture stiffened. Her hands tightened around the chair. She nodded too quickly when someone spoke to her. It was small, but it was there. A tension that hadn't been present before. The idea of checking recordings was met with hesitation. Some said it might be unnecessary. Others said it could help avoid problems later. The conversation went back and forth. I could feel the room growing uneasy. Rachel spoke up then, suggesting they focus on current issues instead of digging into old ones. Her voice sounded calm, but it didn't quite match her expression. She avoided looking in my direction completely. I remained silent. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't need to say anything. The truth didn't need help entering the room. Eventually, it was decided that the footage from earlier months would be reviewed, starting with days when numbers had been off. No names were mentioned. No accusations were made. But everyone knew what day mattered most. The atmosphere changed. Conversations slowed. Smiles faded. Even my parents seemed uneasy, though they didn't say why. It was as if something long buried had begun to stir. As the meeting ended, Rachel rushed out, claiming she wasn't feeling well. No one questioned it. I noticed how quickly she left, how tightly she held her bag. I stayed behind for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the store. I felt no excitement, no relief. Only a steady calm. Whatever was about to happen had nothing to do with me pushing for it. The cameras had always been there. All that had changed was that someone was finally ready to look. And once they did, there would be no way to look away. The footage was loaded without ceremony. No one spoke as the screen came to life. The camera showed the counter, the register, the quiet movements of an ordinary day. At first, it felt almost pointless, like nothing important would appear. Then the moment came. Rachel walked into the frame. She looked around, careful and alert. There was no one else nearby. She opened the drawer, counted the bills quickly, and slipped the cash into her bag. Her movements were calm, practiced, and deliberate. Then she closed the drawer, adjusted her jacket, and walked away. The video kept playing, but no one was watching anymore. The truth had already landed. The room went completely silent. Not the calm kind, but the heavy kind that presses on your chest. My parents didn't move. No one spoke. No one asked questions. The screen froze on an image that said everything. Rachel's face drained of color. She didn't cry at first. She just stared at the screen like she was seeing herself for the first time. There was no explanation to offer. No confusion to hide behind. It was all there, clear and undeniable. I stayed where I was. I didn't feel the rush of victory people talk about. I felt still. Almost detached. The moment didn't belong to me. It belonged to the truth. My father finally sat down, his shoulders heavy. My mother covered her mouth, eyes filling with tears. I could see the weight of every word they had said to me come crashing back into their minds. Rachel tried to speak, but nothing came out. Her voice failed her the way mine had failed me months earlier. The difference was that this time, silence didn't protect her. No one defended her. No one rushed to soften what had just been seen. The story that had been repeated so confidently fell apart in seconds. I watched as understanding settled into the room. The anger that had once been directed at me now had nowhere to go. The accusations, the cold looks, the distance, they all traced back to this single moment on the screen. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The footage spoke for me. In that silence, something shifted. Not just in the room, but in how everyone understood what had happened. The lie was gone. And with it, the version of reality that had pushed me out. The truth didn't raise its voice. It simply stood there, undeniable, and let everything else fall apart around it. After the screen went dark, emotions rushed in from every direction. My mother was the first to break down. She cried openly, repeating my name, saying she should have listened. My father followed soon after, his voice low and shaken as he tried to apologize. He said he had failed me. He said he should have asked more questions. I listened without interrupting. Their words felt heavy, but they didn't land the way they once would have. Something inside me had already shifted. Family members began reaching out almost immediately. Messages came in, some awkward, some emotional. They said they were sorry. They said they never meant to hurt me. They talked about moving forward, about healing, about being together again. I heard them, but I didn't rush to respond. Laura came to see me that evening. She looked exhausted, like someone who had been carrying doubt for too long. She apologized through tears, saying she should have trusted me. She said she was ashamed for questioning my character. I accepted her apology, but quietly. I wasn't angry with her. I was just different now. Rachel cried harder than anyone. She talked about fear and pressure, about feeling trapped and overwhelmed. She said she never thought it would go this far. I watched her carefully as she spoke. Her words explained her stress, but they didn't erase her choices. Everyone seemed to want a reset, like the truth had a rewind button. They wanted things to go back to the way they were before the accusation. I understood the wish, but I couldn't share it. Trust isn't something you switch back on. It doesn't return just because a lie is exposed. It takes time, and sometimes it never fully comes back. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I didn't demand anything. I just listened. That calm surprised people. They expected anger. They expected tears. What they didn't expect was distance. I realized I had learned something during the months of silence. I had learned how to stand on my own without approval. I had learned how to be steady even when people around me weren't. Forgiveness was possible, but it wouldn't be rushed. Relationships don't heal on command. They heal through consistent truth and effort, not sudden regret. As everyone spoke, I understood that the truth had fixed the lie, but it hadn't fixed the damage. that part would take longer. And some things, once broken, never returned to their original shape. After the truth came out and apologies were made, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Nothing around me changed instantly. The house still carried memories of what had happened. Rachel was still my sister, my parents were still my parents, and some things could never be erased. But I realized something important: I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I didn't need to fight for validation. I made the decision quietly, without announcing it. I walked away from the family business. I left the job, the arguments, the tension behind me. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Staying would have meant constant reminders of what had happened, and I didn't want that in my life anymore. I started building a new routine, one that was mine alone. I found work that challenged me but didn't define me by my past. I decorated a small apartment with things that made me feel calm and safe. I learned to cook my own meals, to enjoy silence, and to appreciate a life that wasn't constantly under judgment. People reached out, offering support and friendship. I accepted some of it, rejected some of it, and stopped worrying about what everyone else thought. I realized that my worth wasn't tied to anyone's opinion, not even my family's. I didn't need their constant approval. I stayed in contact with Laura, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been broken. Her presence reminded me that life could be simple and good, even after betrayal. I didn't rush it. I didn't force it. I let things grow naturally, just as I had learned to let the truth grow without pushing. Rachel tried, in her own way, to reconnect. She apologized again, admitted the damage she had done, and tried to make amends. I listened, but I didn't give her the control she once had. Forgiveness didn't mean returning to the way things were. It meant understanding, accepting, and moving forward without letting her actions define my life. I spent time thinking about what revenge really meant. I realized it wasn't shouting, exposing, or punishing. Real revenge was simpler and quieter. It was surviving. It was letting the lie fade away on its own while the truth did the work. It was living in peace while others carried the weight of their choices. For the first time in months, I felt free. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I didn't need to explain myself again. I didn't need anyone's belief or approval. The lie had ended, the truth had spoken, and I had survived. And that was more than enough. It wasn't about making anyone pay. It was about reclaiming my life. That was the revenge I had waited for, the kind that doesn't yell, doesn't seek applause, and doesn't need anyone's recognition. It was mine, and it was complete.